We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of The Murder Project. In this episode, we're going to be headed back to Lubbock, Texas. This episode was requested by a fan out of Lubbock, and after I looked into the episode, I realized that I remember when all of this was taking place. It was kind of big news around the area, and it was something that I was somewhat familiar with, and I thought this is a really good case for the show. Not only that, but it is also going to be a good debrief episode. This case is about Rosendo Rodriguez III and what he was later known to be called as the Suitcase Killer. There's a lot of interesting things that happened in this case, not only the crimes that were committed, but also the way that Rosendo Rodriguez was caught and later convicted of his crimes. Not a spoiler alert, because there's a lot of things in this episode that are going to keep our minds occupied and definitely give us something to talk about. Strap in, ladies and gentlemen, because episode 17 starts right now. It was September 13th, 2005, and a worker at a landfill station just happened to be standing near where a garbage truck was dumping out all of the trash that it collected that day. The worker noticed whenever the trash truck was emptying its contents that a suitcase fell out of the truck. When he looked at the suitcase further, he thought that it looked a little bit new, like almost too new to end up in a trash truck. And not only that, but it looked like the entire suitcase was filled with something. So his curiosity got the best of him, and he decided to go over and take a look inside the suitcase. When he opened the suitcase up, he thought that it contained a mannequin. But after looking a little closer at what he thought was the mannequin, he realized that he had just discovered the dead body of a woman. Later, the police would be called out, and they set up a crime scene and started collecting evidence and doing all the regular things that they do. When they took a look inside the suitcase, they noticed that the body of this woman was packed inside the suitcase in a fetal position. Now, I saw pictures of this suitcase, and it's not a suitcase that is any different than what you might see rolling through an airport. It doesn't look like it is a large or larger than average suitcase, but there's no way to really identify the woman in the suitcase from what they found inside, which was practically nothing. They did notice on one of her ankles, she had a tattoo that said Summer. Later on, the police would identify the body as 29-year-old Summer Lee Baldwin of Lubbock. She was also said to be a prostitute in the area, and they immediately started looking into the case to try to figure out what happened to Summer. Now, when the body was sent to autopsy, they concluded that she had died of asphyxiation, and something else that was interesting to them, and I think a little bit sad, obviously, was she was 2.5 months pregnant. Summer was also a single mother of 4, and this was obviously devastating news to her family. The detective on the case immediately honed in to the suitcase. He thought that this would be a good place to start, considering that the suitcase, besides being covered in trash because it was in a dumpster, in a garbage truck, compacted, and then discharged at the landfill, it still looked new, and the police thought that that would be a really good place to go ahead and start their investigation. After the body was removed from the suitcase, the detective noticed that the UPC barcode was still attached inside the suitcase. The detective got online and researched this UPC code, and he found that this particular suitcase, I believe was a Protégé brand, was only sold at Walmart. So the detective jumped in his car with a copy of the UPC code and went to one of the local Walmarts in Lubbock. When he arrived there, he notified the staff what was going on, and they said not only would they be able to look up that UPC code and find what store that it was purchased from, they would also be able to see the time and how it was purchased, whether it was cash, card, or whatever. So this was an interesting break for the detective, and very good on him for going to Walmart to try to figure all of this out. What he found out was from the Walmart employee was that this suitcase was purchased a little after 3 a.m. Around 3:30 is what the timestamp on the video shows. Not only was this particular suitcase purchased, but there was also another interesting purchase, and that was a box of latex gloves. Now, if you're not putting two and two together, which I'm sure that you are, it's very suspicious that a dead woman was found inside a suitcase that was bought at a Walmart the night before the suitcase was found. And the person who purchased the suitcase also purchased a box of latex gloves. The police went back and reviewed the video from the time of the purchase, and they were able to see a man who was approximately 6 foot tall, had a stocky build, was in his mid-20s, and was probably Hispanic or a dark-complected Caucasian. When they looked at the video outside of the Walmart store, they saw that this man got into a red pickup and drove off. When they looked at how these items were purchased, they found that the person who bought the suitcase and the latex gloves used a credit card, which is mistake number 1. And the name on the credit card was Rosendo Rodriguez. After that, at approximately 3:46 a.m., which is about 16 minutes after the suitcase was purchased, this same person pulled into a gas station and filled up with fuel. They noticed that across the street from this gas station was a Holiday Inn hotel, and they also were able to find that this same person had stayed at that Holiday Inn. When they went over to talk to the staff at the hotel, the staff told police that they had not actually cleaned the room yet. So this was going to be another huge break for the detectives on this case. Now, when they asked about Rosendo Rodriguez, they said that the same credit card, I believe, was used to purchase a room, but it was purchased under the name Thomas Rodriguez. They went ahead and searched the room that Rodriguez had rented, and when they went inside, they found that there was blood, or what looked like blood, or kind of a rust color on the carpet, spots of what they perceived to be blood on the sheets, and also on the box springs in the room. After they started processing this as a crime scene, they went outside and started looking for any evidence in the hallways or around the premises. And in the same hallway that the room was on, next to the elevator, in a trash can, the police found a plastic sack from the hotel. And what it looked like to me was the same type of bag that would be hanging in the closet for you to put your dirty clothes in. They found that bag. Inside that bag, they found a Walmart bag. Inside the Walmart bag, they found a receipt for the exact same suitcase that they found Summer's body in, with a pair of latex gloves. At this time, police are more than interested in Rodriguez, and they need to figure out where he's at and what he's doing. So they start looking up information. They find that Rodriguez had left the Lubbock area shortly after the suitcase was purchased, a couple of hours by what they can speculate. And the way that they figured this out was they used his cell phone records, and they pinged his location from Lubbock to San Antonio. Looking into this, they were able to figure out that this was actually a bus route. So they thought that Rodriguez had possibly committed this murder and then got on a Greyhound bus and went back to San Antonio. But they didn't know what exactly brought Rodriguez to the area. Later on, they would find out that Rodriguez was in the military and he was actually down in Lubbock that exact same time for training. So they hop in their car and they head on down to San Antonio, and they want to speak to Rodriguez. When they find him, he is staying at his parents' house, and he's actually in his bedroom on his computer in instant messenger chats. And if you remember the episode that Mike and I did about the Jeremy Stanky and Jasmine Richardson case, instant messenger was a pretty big thing back then, and apparently Rodriguez had spent a lot of time on instant messenger talking to women and trying to set up situations where he might be able to meet these women and have some sort of sexual encounter with them. Originally, when the police questioned Rodriguez, he said that he did not have anything to say about it. He did not know what they were talking about, and he did not give them any information further. They went ahead and took Rodriguez into custody and took him back to Lubbock. When they got back to Lubbock, they figured out that they had something that they could use against Rodriguez. And that was the fact that they had found a very crucial detail that would be good evidence to link Rodriguez to this murder, and that, of course, would be his DNA. The DNA used to link Rodriguez to this case was found on the rubber gloves that were in the trash can in the hallway outside his room. On those latex gloves, they found the DNA of Summer on the outside. They found her DNA on the inside, and they found Rodriguez's DNA on the inside. The blood in the room that Rodriguez had rented also went back to Summer. And last but not least, when they did the autopsy, they were able to collect DNA that was also linked back to Rodriguez through a rape kit. So the detectives were thinking to themselves that they had this thing pretty much wrapped up from the beginning. This was all in the span of just a few days. They thought that Summer was probably killed either late on the 12th or early in the morning on the 13th, just before the suitcase was purchased. So by the 15th, Rodriguez was already in custody, and they felt like they had had this case pretty well wrapped up. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Rodriguez still said that he did not commit this crime and that he did not have anything to say. So the detectives decided to take a little deeper look into his computer. And when they got on his computer, they noticed that Rodriguez had searched Summer's name several times. He would go on and search the names, read the articles associated with the name, and from what I'm guessing, try to see if the police had located any suspects or see if he can gather any information off of that. When they looked through his search history, they also noticed that he would search another name quite frequently, and that name was Joanna Rogers. When they saw Joanna Rogers' name, an alarm went off, because just 18 months before Summer was murdered, Joanna went missing and she was never found. When they went back and started looking into the details of this, they saw that Rodriguez had actually been in contact with Joanna just before she went missing. And they thought, is it possible that miraculously they stumbled across Rodriguez after he had murdered Summer and they found her body, which is amazing on itself just because of the scenario with the landfill. But it's going to get even more amazing as this story goes on, because there's no other way for me to describe it, as the miracles kind of just keep coming. So getting into the details of Joanna. On the night that Joanna went missing, her parents recall having a conversation with her just before they went to bed. And they suspected at the time that she had gone missing around 1 a.m. Later on, when the police talked to her dad, he said that it was very strange because Joanna did not take anything with her when she left. Now, she was still a missing persons at this time, so I'm sure in the beginning, the police might have thought that she was a runaway. And that's very common in situations like that, especially with 16-year-old girls, and they might have tried to spin it as a runaway instead of something else. But as time went on, I think more and more people started to realize that Joanna wasn't going to come home, and it is a good possibility that foul play was involved. And the reason I say that is because she did not take anything with her. No clothes were missing. Her car keys were at the house. Her car was also at the house. She did not take her cell phone with her. She did not take any money. She literally took nothing and vanished into thin air. Now, when the police looked at a picture of Joanna, they noticed that there were two similarities between her and Summer, that being they were both fair-skinned white females with red hair, and they thought this may possibly be a link between the two. So the police decided to kind of go the Hail Mary route and see if they could look through the landfill and find Joanna's body. This would be a 1 in a billion shot if I just had to take a guess. 1 in a million I don't think would cover it. But when the police went to talk to the operators at the landfill yet a second time, they noticed that, or they were informed rather, that they had a grid system in place, because this landfill was 360 acres of mountains of trash. They said it was about 3 football fields long, and the odds of them finding Joanna's body were very slim. But, as I just mentioned, the employees of the landfill stated that they had a grid system, and they could go back and check to see in what grid they were dumping trash on the day that Joanna went missing. When this happened, they were able to rally several hundred volunteers to search for Joanna, and this would be, I think, a very difficult situation for volunteers and police, especially because of the amount of trash that they had to try to sift through. They were obviously looking for a suitcase because they thought that if Rodriguez had killed Summer and thrown her in a suitcase in the landfill or in the dumpster, then what if he did the same thing to Joanna? After about 12 weeks of searching and digging through the trash, the police were about to give up hope when, lo and behold, somebody finds a suitcase in all of the debris when they open up the suitcase. And I would recommend that you search this case and look at the photos if you can handle that kind of thing, because it's really kind of it's a sad deal just all around, but it kind of gives you an idea of how these women were stuffed into these suitcases, and it is pictures that I can't put on the social media accounts. But if you can stomach something like this, I would definitely go in and have a look, because the way that these women were discarded is just terrible. And I'm glad that they threw this Hail Mary and went out there and searched the landfill, and I'm glad the volunteers showed up and helped the police out. This was a big deal, and it helped tremendously, and I can't imagine a scenario where if these events didn't happen, that Joanna's body would have never been found. Now, after they found Joanna's body, they were unable to find any DNA on the suitcase or any information particularly about the suitcase, and they weren't able to determine in the manner that Joanna died. But they were able to kind of put together a narrative about what could have happened on the night that she went missing. Police went back and looked at the phone records for Rodriguez and Joanna. There wasn't anything on her cell phone records, but they did notice that there were calls from Rodriguez just before she was suspected of leaving the house at 1 a.m. that went to her landline in her room. So at this time, they have Joanna's body. They have the instant messages from Rodriguez to Joanna, and they have Rodriguez calling Joanna just before she went missing. And what the police thought might happen was Rodriguez called her and said that he was in town. They were able to confirm that Rodriguez was in town yet again during this time for training. And when he picked Joanna up, something happened and she was killed. I would bet that we are probably all thinking that there was a proposition for sex or something involving sex, and Joanna either refused or tried to get away, and that is when Rodriguez did whatever he did, but we are unable to confirm that exactly because the body was so decomposed. But if they go back and look at what happened to Summer, they think that the two might have met similar fates. One thing that I was waiting to tie in until now is that when they found Summer's body, she had been beaten badly. It looked like someone had really lost control and beat Summer literally to death, and they were afraid that the same thing might have happened to Joanna. I think what's also interesting about this is that the autopsy for Summer stated that she had died from asphyxia, and the coroner believed that when Summer was placed into that suitcase, she was still alive, that she did not die until after she was already in the suitcase. And that, to me, kind of makes me want to ask more questions, because that would mean that Summer was still alive in the hotel room whenever Rodriguez went to go purchase the suitcase. In the videos, it did not appear that he was in any sort of hurry. He was very calm, he was very relaxed, just a guy strolling through Walmart, grabbing some luggage, some latex gloves, and heading on out. And they don't really talk a whole lot about the vehicle that Rodriguez was in. My guess is that he either borrowed it from somebody or he rented it from a rental company. That's why I believe he stopped and filled it up with fuel just before returning to the hotel. It's probably safe to say that after he filled the vehicle up with fuel, he went back, got Summer's body, disposed of it in a dumpster, either went back to the hotel and got a little rest, but then he returned the vehicle to whoever it had loaned it to him, whether personal or through a rental company, and he jumped on a Greyhound and headed back to San Antonio. But now, tying all this back together in the investigation, the police now present this evidence to Rodriguez. And when they do this, I think it is smart because they waited to talk to him again until they had all the information that tied him back to Joanna. This is one of those things where when the police go to talk to a suspect of a crime and the suspect is in full denial of everything that happened, you don't want to show all your cards, but you want to go ahead and show him that you're at least not bluffing. And when they went in, they told Rodriguez that they had the suitcase. They were able to use the UCP code to tie to him being in the Walmart with his credit card, leaving the Walmart, getting fuel, going back to his hotel, and then heading back to San Antonio. Then they laid out the other information they had, which was they had Rodriguez talking to Joanna just before he took a trip to Lubbock, and then calling her on her landline just before she went missing and was never seen again. He was obviously at this time, he knows that the police had found Joanna's body, or at least you would think he knew. So they decided that they would try to cut a deal. And I think the reason that they did this is because the evidence for Summer's case was very strong, But the evidence for Joanna's case, although we are looking at it from the fact that we know that these two things have to be tied together, but the evidence that they have towards Rodriguez as far as Joanna goes is circumstantial, because they don't know how she died. They don't have any DNA evidence linking Rodriguez to this murder, but everybody's probably saying the same thing. Yes, it's him. So they tell Rodriguez about the evidence they have against Summer, and he makes a confession. He says that this was all in self-defense. And I think we knew that that was probably coming, that Rodriguez would try to spin this into a way where it wasn't his fault. So what he said was that he had propositioned Summer for sex. She came back to his hotel. When he got back to his hotel, she tried to rob him. And when she tried to rob him, I believe he said that she produced a knife, and he had to defend himself, and he ended up beating her to death. Even though Summer supposedly pulled a knife on Rodriguez, he did not have any injuries from this alleged altercation. And like we are probably also thinking, the police did not buy any of this, and then they kind of hit him with the big one. They said, "Did you know that Summer was pregnant?" And we are going to try this case as a capital felony, because not only did you murder Summer, but you murdered her 2.5-month-old baby that was in the womb. So we're going to go for the death penalty on this one. However, if you give us the confession for Joanna, we will take the death penalty off the table, and we will give you life in prison without the possibility of parole. When Rodriguez heard about this, he said, "I'm going to go ahead and take that deal." And he told the police that he had killed Joanna. And basically, he tried to spin this into a situation where when Joanna got into his vehicle, she attacked him and he had to defend himself. In both situations, Rodriguez is taking credibility for the murders, but he's also saying that it wasn't his fault. He's saying that he had to defend himself from attacks from these two women. Now, it doesn't matter whether or not we believe those instances to be true, because with Rodriguez taking the plea deal, that means the case is not going to trial. He admitted to the murders. He's going to go to jail for the rest of his life, and that story is over. But that's not where it ends. Later, in a surprise to the district attorney's office, Rodriguez said that he's taking his plea off the table, and he's actually going to plead not guilty to these cases. I would assume that his attorneys told him that by taking his plea off the table, it also means that if he goes to trial and is convicted, then he can be sentenced to death. So all of the deals come off the table. That includes his immunity from the death penalty. But he doubles down and says that he's not guilty, and he takes it to trial. After the trial, it only took the jury a few hours to find him guilty on both counts. And surprise, surprise, Rodriguez is sentenced to death. It took about 13 years for Rodriguez to go through the system, but he was eventually executed on March 27th, 2018. The murders took place in 2004, and he went to trial in 2005. So still 13 years, but not as long as you would hear some of these appeals processes drag on, and, you know, it's not 30 years after the crime was committed, but 13, still a long time, but not as long as it could have been in the appeals process, which I assume did not work out very well for him. So getting into Rodriguez's execution, the victims' families, both Summer and Joanna, went to Huntsville to witness Rodriguez's execution, and the only thing that Rodriguez did before the execution was he looked over at his loved ones and he mouthed the words, "I love you." He never looked over to where the victims' families were at, and I think this says a lot about Rodriguez, but it also doesn't quite match up to what happens next. Rodriguez was asked if he wanted to give a final statement, and this happens around 6:17 p.m., and he spoke for approximately 7 minutes. One thing that he did not do in his 7-minute rant was apologize for the deaths of Summer or Joanna, which is kind of interesting because he didn't admit to the crimes, which, if you remember from our Johnny Frank Garrett case, there is only a small percentage of people that don't admit to the crimes when they're given their last words. Rodriguez is one of those people, but instead he insisted that people write to those who are on death row, and he said that people had a biblical duty to visit those in prison. He also said that he brought up a civil lawsuit against the Lubbock County Medical Examiner's Office, and saying that his appeals were denied, and that there was some sort of nefarious acts that the Lubbock County Medical Examiner's Office was involved in, more specifically with the rape kit that they collected from Summer. And I don't know exactly if this ties into his case specifically, but there were some instances with some other DNA collected that might have been found, that might have been used in court but were later thrown out. And that happens from time to time in some cases, and then everybody that had a case under the same medical examiner's office is going to say that their evidence should also be thrown out. And if this is the case for Rodriguez, then if you threw the rape kit out, you still have Rodriguez beating Summer almost to death, shoving her in a suitcase, and then throwing her in a trash can. So I don't see how that would work out for him as well. Rodriguez also commented that he wanted the FBI to investigate the Lubbock County District Attorney's Office, and he said that the state may have my body, but it does not have my soul. Very inspiring words from a murderer. Rodriguez would also say that he would like for people in Texas to boycott Texas businesses in an effort to basically pressure the state in abolishing the death penalty, because Rodriguez admitted to his crimes in the beginning, and I think we need to remember that, people. He admitted to what he did, but he did not think that he deserved the death penalty. Towards the end, he started to show some sort of emotion, and he teared up when he said, "With the Lord into your hands, I commend my spirit. I have fought the good fight. I ran the race. I have accomplished what God intended me to do. Warden, I'm ready to join my Father." It said after this, Rodriguez turned to face towards his family and began singing the words, "Here I go." After this, Rodriguez was pronounced dead at 6:46 p.m. And that last statement where he starts kind of saying that he fought the good fight and he ran his race, he accomplished what God intended for him to do. What kind of sociopath says something like that after he had murdered 2 people and thrown their bodies in a dumpster? This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. But what I would also like to bring up is that there is a lot of information in this case that I think sounds really interesting. They said that Summer was still alive when she was placed in the suitcase. So that begs a lot of questions about how the assault went down, how Summer got into Rodriguez's room, how she was left alive while he was casually buying these items. He's gone for half an hour approximately. The information about the coroner's office, the plea deal that was put on the table and then taken off, but that ladies and gentlemen, is your cue for me to say we are going to need to discuss this on the debrief, because I think Mike and I can dive into some of these issues that I think I see with this case and some of the things that I think are very strange about this case and how it kind of progressed through the investigation and ultimately the outcome of the investigation, which ended with Rodriguez getting the needle. So I think I'm going to leave it there for this episode, and I will see you guys on the debrief. We'll see you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to the episodes. We really appreciate it. I can't thank you guys enough. And if you're listening, please, right now, if you could do this one thing for me, please go on whatever platform you're listening on, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple, please go and hit 5 stars if you think we deserve it, and leave us a review. I know that some people don't like to get caught up into that, but it only takes a few seconds, and you can put something as simple as great show, whatever you want to put in there. Just leave us a review, hit that 5 stars if you think we deserve it, and I would appreciate that a whole lot. Also, if you're looking for us on the social medias, we are on Facebook at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, type in facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're looking for us on Instagram, we are at The Murder Project. And if you are looking for us on Twitter, we are at The Murder Pod. As I mentioned earlier, I thank you so much for tuning in. Our numbers are going up. I can't explain to you how much this means to Mike and I. We appreciate it so much. I will talk to you guys again on the next episode of the debrief. It'll be very interesting. Mike and I are ready to take this one on and bring the information to you. I will talk to you guys soon, but please remember, head up, eyes up, stay alive.